Assalamu alaikum students. Hope all of you are fine today. Today I have come forward with a new class, reproduction in plants. Students, as you all know that you have come to this world by a process that is known as reproduction. So all the living beings, they produce copies of themselves and the process is known as reproduction. So in short we can say reproduction is a process in which living beings produce copies of themselves. There are many ways in which living beings produce copies of themselves. Some organisms they give birth to babies and some organisms they even lay eggs. So in this way there are many ways in which reproduction takes place. But if we have a collection of all the process of reproduction and look at it, we can find that we can classify this reproduction in two categories as sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. So students, today we are going to discuss some of the different ways or modes of asexual reproduction. So here I have written on the board the first mode of asexual reproduction, which is budding. Budding is a mode of asexual reproduction in which simple organisms reproduce copies of themselves without the help of any other individual. That means at the time of reproduction, the individual organism doesn't require any other help from other organism. In this way, we find that the organism is able to reproduce by asexual reproduction. Simple organisms reproduce by having this asexual reproduction in the budding process. In this process, what happens is that the outgrowths called buds, sometimes break off from the parent organism to grow into new individuals, and they may even remain attached to the parent plant, grow and produce more buds. That means you might have noticed some simple organisms like yeast, and or you can even talk about the buds that you find in potatoes and potato tubers. So same like this, the outgrowths that takes place in the organism's body. Sometimes it remains attached to the organism's body and it is to grow up and reproduce. And sometimes it gets break off from the parent's body and it reproduces. So such a mode of reproduction is known as budding. Secondly, you have got the spore formation. It is also another mode of asexual reproduction in which the organism, the plant produces spores from its body, and with the formation of the spores, reproduction takes place. You might have noticed the fern plants. In Bengali, we used to call a name Bud Phaloi. You know it very well. Sometimes you might have seen these fern plants on all walls or on the bark of trees or on the trunks of trees also, big trees. Sometimes you might have noticed, or sometimes while walking around the street, you might have noticed nearby the side of the road these fern plants. So these fern plants, if you observe the leaves of it, you can find at the bottom of it some dark spores. So these dark spores are covered with hard covering. Inside it, what is present is that the spores are present. So when these spores are carried off to different locations from the parent plant by the action of wind or water or some animals, what happens is that it falls on to different location and it produces into a new plant. So many non-flowering plants do not produce flowers. So they reproduce by spore formation. Spores are tiny cells protected by the thick wall and which helps them survive in unfavorable conditions. So these spores are always present under a hard covering, and because of the presence of this hard covering, they are always protected due to unfavorable conditions. And at the time when the plant happens to get favorable conditions, it grows up into a new plant. There are many organisms, organic plants we find, which used to grow out of spores. They don't produce any flowers, so they produce spores, and from the production of the spores, they reproduce into a new plant. When a spore carried by the air finds the right conditions, that is food, warmth and moisture, it grows into a new individual plant. Molds, as you know, it is another organism which reproduces in the same way, that is spore formation, by producing spores. Mushrooms, they also produce by spore formation. Okay, you might have seen molds, mushrooms and all. Okay, they all produce copies of themselves by producing spores. Nextly, you have got fragmentation. It is another mode of asexual reproduction. In this mode, what happens is that the plant, it produces what? Fragments. When the fragments are broken into different parts, and from the broken parts, what happens? A new fragment grows again. That means you might have noticed sometimes the algae in ponds and ditches. Okay, it used to grow into long filaments like fragments. So sometimes at the time when the fishes and all or some other organisms happens to swim on the water, these fragments used to break into different parts. So after some time you might have noticed that the fragments get joined up again. That means they don't get joined up, but actually these fragments grows into new individuals or new parts again. So such a mode of reproduction is known as fragmentation. Okay, the broken parts can grow into a new filament, and this kind of reproduction is known as fragmentation. Spirogyria is a kind of algae that floats in ponds and ditches. Okay, the cells of this algae form long filaments. If any part of it gets broken or it gets break, the fragments can grow into a new filament. Okay, so such a mode of reproduction is known as fragmentation. Lastly, you have got vegetative reproduction. It is the asexual mode of reproduction, okay, in which the reproduction takes place without the help of any other individual, okay, without the involvement of the sexual part of the plant. In all the different modes of reproduction, you have learned that the involvement of the sexual part of the plant takes place. But in case of vegetative reproduction, what happens is that the involvement of the sexual part of the plant doesn't take place. Okay, so it's the reproduction which takes place without the involvement of the sexual part of the plant. Okay, and the organism is able to reproduce into a new individual plant. For example, you might have seen the underground stems of potato, onion and all. These underground stems like potato and onion, what happens is that they are able to grow into a new individual plant with the help of their what? Extra growths that we find on the stems. For example, potato, ginger, onion, garlic, turmeric and taro, okay, all are considered as underground stems and they can produce into a new plant. They bear buds from which new plants can grow. So all these underground stems, as I've said, they used to grow buds, and from the growth of the buds, a new individual plant is able to grow. Okay, lilies are again grown from the underground stems. The underground stems of potato is known as tuber, okay, while those of onion, lily and garlic is known as bulb. Okay, nextly, under vegetative reproduction, we have seen that some other plants like chrysanthemum, strawberries, mint and wood sorrel, okay, they are able to reproduce into a new plant with the help of their subaerial stems. With the help of their subaerial stems, branches growing from the base of the stem creep along the ground or just below the ground. Okay, these branches grow into roots at the roots, and the roots grow into soil, and new plants grow from the roots again. So such plants, okay, like chrysanthemum, strawberry and all, they are able to reproduce from the vegetative parts, that is the subaerial stems of those plants. Lastly, we have got the leaf buds. So some of the plants, they are even able to reproduce into a new plant with the help of their leaf buds. You might have seen bryophyllum, which is scientifically known as good luck plant. Okay, such a plant used to have some outgrowths on the leaves. Okay, these outgrowths that grows on the leaves, sometimes it remains attached to the leaf and sometimes it is to get separated or from the parent leaf or parent plant. and it is to grow into a new plant. So these are all the different modes that comes under vegetative reproduction, okay, which helps to reproduce into a new individual without the involvement of the sexual part of the plant. And lastly, we have got another artificial mode of reproduction, that is cuttings. We all know that our parents sometimes what they used to do is that they used to cut the stems of sugarcane plant or lemon and rose plant sometimes to let the plant grow into a new plant again by cutting the stems and letting them covering it under a soil. Okay, sometimes what happens is that the stem starts bearing some roots. So such a mode of reproduction is known as artificial mode of reproduction, that is cutting. Okay, gardeners, they used to grow new plants from the cutting a portion of a stem of a plant, and it is not a natural mode of reproduction. It has been developed so that we need to fulfill our needs. A part of the stem is cut and planted in moist soil, and after some days what happens, the root grows out of the portion of the stem which has been covered under the soil, and it is to grow into a new plant of rose, sugarcane, mango, lemon and many other plants. So my students, hope you all have understood. If you have any queries or doubts related to the points that I have discussed today, okay, you can call me every night between 8 to 10. With this, I end up my class. Thank you. Have a nice day.